Home, brought to you by Remax Diamond Realty.
We are talking about property as we always do at this time of show. Liz and Gina are here, of course, my two dear friends from Remax Diamond Realty Guam. Half a day, ladies.
Half a day.
And it's interesting how the two of you are adjacent to each other because today we would like to talk about neighboring property.
Yeah, my boundary point.
Right here, right here. I'm drawing the line.
Okay, well, and let's not have you guys get this whole Hatfields versus the McCoys, fighting thing. But very often that can be the case because two people, they get along civilly as neighbors, and then all of a sudden somebody wants to grow a tree, someone wants to make a fence, and all of a sudden it's like whose property is what.
That's
so
right.
Can you break that down for me, how you actually figure that
Well,
out?
remember we had the show about where the markers are. We had that.
Certainly.
And then Gina, the following week, talked about more information about what happens next. Well, if you're neighbors, of course, you have your point defined. Now, a neighbor could dispute it and say, oh no, my boundary, or put a tree over your markers. Then what happens? So they're encroaching. It's referred to as encroaching into your boundary point. So the standard is you have 15 feet from the front of your house to your boundary point, 8 feet from the side, and 10 from the back.
And you talked about that before.
Yes, we discussed that in some of the shows. So when we had the show, we met some people at a party, and they said, but my neighbor's got this wall, and it's all the way up to my wall. What happens with that? I said, well, it's not your problem. For example, if it happened to you, it's the neighbor's problem. So if they were trying to sell their home, they'd have difficulty selling it because they'd have to demolish that section of the wall to comply with either the 10 feet, the 8 feet, or the 50. They'd have to make sure it's within the proper government code. And if it isn't, they have to correct it in order to move forward to sell the property, to sell the house.
Yeah, it's called conforming. It has to conform
Conform.
to the law.
Yeah, I was going to say, Gina, we see these days on Guam because the population is expanding. There's so many people coming over here, so many people living off base if they're in the military, that you see a lot of these really densely populated residential areas. So how often does that happen when people not even like a big court battle, but just disputes about their property overlapping?
It happens often. It really does. Especially in situations that you're referring to where people are extending or expanding their property. And a lot of times they do this without really knowing what they're allowed to do. So in Derrida, we run into this quite often where they're in a subdivision that doesn't allow for duplex because in a residential zone, which is R1, you're not allowed to have a duplex, but now they've gone and done that. But specifically, the way this relates to your survey issue is they've built into the 8 feet setback, or they've built to their front lot line or all the way to their back line. And it isn't just the extensions. Fencing, for instance. I've got a situation where a homeowner has recently purchased a piece of property. We get to the property and there's already existing fences. So the question is, well, whose fence is it? I mean, is it on my side of the boundary? Is it on their side? If it's on the lot line, so because the two adjacent properties share a common line, if it's on the lot line, and for instance, let's say the fence wasn't completed. How do I complete this fence if I want to complete it? Well, you and the neighbor, you can't just go and finish the fence. You've got to mutually agree that you're going to do it. Then you have to mutually agree in writing that the fence belongs to the two of you. Because if not, and later on you want to go and sell the property, the bank's going to say, wait, whose fence is that anyway? And why is it connected to the people next door? It becomes an issue if you don't do it properly and do it in writing.
We've had some families where they would show the markers and they'll build the fence inside the marker.
That's the safest way.
Safest way. So they'll build it in and they'll mark it so that they always know it's there. And then some that will go to the neighbor and say, hey, let's split the expense for the fence and let's build it right down the middle. And then they share the expense. Sometimes the neighbor may not want to spend for the fence, but say, fine, go ahead, do it, it's your expense, but you can put it down the middle. But then later in the future, when you sell, you've got to disclose it to the new owner that this is the arrangement we made, so that there's disclosure there.
Okay, now, Liz, you were telling us a couple weeks ago the importance of the blueprint when they're drawn up and printed out, and certified, ratified, notified, whatever
Right.
the terminology is. But is that the document that very often resolves these types of conflicts?
Your map, your survey map, there's what they refer to as an as-built map. We pointed that out, where it shows a diagram of your boundary points of your lot, and then your house. If your house is situated right in the middle, to the left, to the bottom, and how many feet does it sit within the boundary point. You always want to make sure it fits and conforms with the government code. So the as-built shows any structure within your property, it's shown on the map. And then your new owner can say, wow, okay, great, everything's conforming, we can move forward with the transaction. And again, that's referred as an as-built. So if you have a fence, that fence could be drawn into that map as well, and it's defined.
Well, certainly there is a lot more to talk about this, and let's do this next week. We'll call this part 4. All right. Fascinating discussion, everybody. So make sure that you join us on our YouTube channel or right here on KUM TV. We continue this discussion about exactly where your property begins and probably more importantly, where it ends. All right, we're back after this.